Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us at this webinar. This is the April webinar of 2024, and it's jointly organized by the IU ASEAN Global Gateway and the School of Education. The webinar is part of a monthly series that brings together international and IU scholars in discussion. And so today we are very honored to have joining us two international experts in mental health and behavioral health experts, Naomi Swiezy from Indiana University in Annapolis and the IU Riley Hospital, and she is joined by Malkeith Singh from St. Andrews in Singapore. This webinar will focus on global autism training for diverse learners and evidence-based practices. Naomi Swiezy is professor of psychiatry and director of Hands in Autism Interdisciplinary Training and Resource Center at the IU Riley Hospital. Malkeith Singh, head adult services and center manager at St. Andrews Center, an NGO in Singapore for education, training, and care of persons with autism and their families. I am Farida Pawan, the IU ASEAN Global Gateway Academic Director and Professor in the School of Education at Indiana University. For your information, the webinar will take the form of 30 minutes of conversation, and this will be followed by about 20 minutes of Q&A. We will then proceed with questions that audience members post to us. And so audience members, you can post your questions anytime on the Q&A panel. And at the end of 30 minutes, we'll draw those questions and for discussions with the speakers. And so at this point in time, I would like to welcome both Professor Naomi and Keith Singh, Mr. Keith Singh, to our community and to our conversation. Please proceed.
Thank you so much for inviting us. Appreciate that. So Keith, if it's okay, I thought I would just go ahead and start out our discussion a little bit, telling a little bit about the context of my work and individual view, and then we talk about yours as well. So, as you know, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working in the field of autism for over 30 years, unbelievable but true. And in my early work, I was really focused on parent training. So really helping folks who had children with autism to be able to practice and learn and get some coaching on how to work best with their children. And what I found in that work, I love that work, but I also found in working with families that it was really difficult for them to learn within a clinical environment and then go out and be able to practice and apply everything that they had learned when they were working with me. But they also had a complicated context as well, where they were teachers and medical folks who didn't seem to really understand or collaborate well with the families from their perspective, from the family perspective, and likewise from the other perspective. So that's what really drew me into developing Hands, and as a way to help folks to train and learn and have kind of a similar language across all of the systems, be able to bridge together more effectively, and ultimately to be able to support individuals with autism in their community. So a little bit about me. So I know you have a lot to share too, just about who you are and what you've been doing at St. Andrews.
Right. So yeah, you know me pretty well. So I've been working with adults with autism for a little over 15 years now. So where I'm from, St. Andrews Autism Center, we cater to lifelong support. So we actually run a special needs school that has about 300 odd students. and then 2-day activity centers catering to adults on the age ranging between 18 to 55, where they come in for day services. And then we also run a residential facility where it's 24/7 care and support for people who live in with us. So I truly kind of stumbled upon autism, if I'm being very honest with you, but kind of grew and loved what I do. What I've realized over the past few years that I've been here is that there's a lot of challenges akin to what people in the US are facing, and generally trying to get different agencies and everyone aligned in practices and how to support people with autism. So whether it be professionals like myself, direct care support workers, healthcare services, even families. I think the biggest challenge in Singapore right now is really equipping families with the right strategies as to how we can go about supporting their child in the different settings that they engage their child in, whether it be home, in the community, and as well as in basically any kind of areas that they bring their child out towards. Yeah. So that's a bit of what I do. And let's dive a bit deeper as to what we've been doing together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are, a lot of those similarities, like you said, in the United States as well. And why I focused with families and just seeing their struggle and being able to, get information that they needed and feel well prepared in working with their children. But then, I don't know about you, but you finding that individuals who are within your own center, staff people, administrators, anybody in any role, seems to have a lot of questions about, not necessarily about autism. I mean, obviously you're an autism center, but maybe how to implement effectively across multiple individuals of, you indicated a number of contexts that you all work in. And we do as well. So, really having difficulty in day to day as you're working with different individuals that have different profiles and different levels of functioning and different contexts, how to use similar principles across all of that. Would you say that is something that you struggle with your staff, or that you notice with your staff and other employees there?
Yeah, most definitely. You very much hit the nail on the head, to be honest with you. So the thing that I've seen in my time here is that not just staff, you're right. I mean, administrators is one thing, but general public education, awareness, and training is required as well. So like Singapore has taken a concerted effort to kind of train the community a bit more. But not to the extent where they can effectively support an individual with autism or any disability, but instead just kind of giving the very basic practices. While there is value to it, to be honest with you, but what we see is that a more detailed effort and really imparting skills could go a long way in helping an individual with autism actually feel inclusive in where they're at. So I reckon that the work that Hans is doing and how we've actually been partnered together and been engaging together can go a long way if St. Andrews can continue to impart some of the knowledge and skills that we have to the wider community that we serve.
Yeah, and let's delve into that. I know you prompted that, so sorry to ignore your prompt. But let's go into that a little bit about some of the work that we've done together and why we've done that, and kind of on both sides where the interest in doing that has come from. So I know that originally I met your colleagues when our staff and myself were doing an international conference and presentation on some of what we do with autism and training folks within the community to use evidence-based practices that we know work well, but how to do that across environments. And the communication to us afterwards was, we need that. And so that started the trajectory where yourself and your colleagues first came to Indiana for one of our intensive trainings. And I don't know if you could share maybe just a little bit about that experience.
Right. So I think it was integral for us to actually be in Indiana for that 5 days and to undergo that training is probably because it kind of gave us the context and the capabilities of what you guys were doing and how you can best serve us. So more often than not, when we engage external consultants and experts, most of the time there's this challenge with truly understanding or explaining the context of what services in Singapore is like and whether it's potentially transferable, like where is the hands model in autism going to be effective in Singapore and how we do things here. So having had those 5 days and undergoing that intensive training, it kind of opened up our eyes to the possibility of having that extended partnership and really gave us a better understanding of what you did. And then naturally being hands-on, it gave us the confidence also to know, practicing those skills with the people you serve actually kind of informed us that, yeah, it's going to be applicable to us. And then we could bring this back and see how we can actually better our services and then improve the quality of life for our clients.
Absolutely. And I really respected that you all took that time to come across to the United States and spend that much time and really delve in to see if you did think that it was something that could translate into the work that you needed done. So then likewise, that is very much the way that we do things as well in building partnerships is to visit the cultures and make sure that we similarly are getting a vision for and learning from you all as experts in your own culture, with how we could envision adaptations or changes or really ultimately the translatability of what we already have to be beneficial to you. So the next trip was us to come out and do some kind of pilot some training with some of your staff, see how they receive that, and also to just be able to be within your various environments in the DAC, and to start to envision and put together a plan for what we would do from there. I don't know if you have any comments about
Right. So
just
I
our
was
visit.
so I was just going to lean in to kind of ask you, what were some of the cultural differences you saw, seeing the different contexts between your site in the US and having come over into Singapore? Like, I would have envisioned it being a bit of a challenge, and I would just love to hear more on your thoughts about it.
Yeah, I think one of the nice things is that we didn't really have the language barrier, so that made it really easy. All of you were so engaging and happy to have us there. We definitely had that sense that it wasn't something that was being put upon folks, or at least that's how they made us feel. But they really, really were interested in what we had to offer. And ultimately, I think it's not uncommon to what we see sometimes in the United States as well when you go to any different place. So, obviously I'm in a university setting and traveling to various community settings, but I don't have a medical office, so to speak. I don't have a school. I don't have a day activity center, all of those things. And so very oftentimes there is a lot of skepticism. But there's also a lot of sense that everything is broken and wrong. And I think at the DAC, it was very clear that there was so much to build on. So many really great foundational pieces that we would look to train that we really wouldn't need to train deeply because you already had those going on. So
Right.
how do you, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say we appreciate the kind words that you have for my staff. I think it's definitely something that we made an effort to definitely want to welcome you guys over, but also we had an alignment, within myself and the staff as to, what were the gaps in our services and how we wanted to improve it. And that priming on the ground was actually key to getting them prepared for your visit and to engage yourself in a more concerted effort. So what happened there was that visit, that 5-day visit, then again comes back into the picture because it was so important that they understood what we were trying to deliver was from experience. Like having gone over to Indiana and experience it, they could then get that buy-in, that understanding that This is not just going to be a one-off engagement. It's not just going to be a simple consultation, but instead a longer-term partnership that is meant to build on what we have. We're not looking to replace some of the practices, but instead just build on it and embed it and make it a bit better. Yeah.
No, excellent. And I know that one of the things that your colleagues had said initially is that there had been so many consultants who had come in and out and, very much the experience of here's the innovation of the day, but really wanting a model that would allow folks to understand the basic premises and basic principles that really don't change with those various strategies or various programs that you're putting in place. And so, hopefully, that is what folks have been experiencing, is that it's not a whole new menu item of the day, but rather it's something that helps to contextualize a process, a curriculum, and pieces that are essential to the process. And in there, there are choices of various programs that align with that, but it gives you somewhat of a roadmap for putting those things together. Do you feel
Definitely.
like that?
Yeah, most definitely. So the thing of what we've experienced so far is how globally there's many experts, but in very specific and identified domains. So for instance, if there's visual structure, you can take PBIS, positive behavior support. So they are experts in singular domains. But what was the difference with what Hans was doing is that you encompassed it all. You weaved it into a way where it was a lot more easy to understand for my staff, because they have different levels of understanding and educational background, but it didn't deter them from actually grasping all the different concepts and understanding how they work in alignment and together, rather than as a singular standalone kind of intervention. So yeah, I totally agree in terms of how it's been helpful to us in the center.
Nice. So that wasn't the end. That was very much the beginning with both of our trips, and kind of that rapport building and piloting a little bit, and then the development of a 3-year that turned into a little longer because of COVID and needing to take a little bit of a hiatus there. But the ultimate goal really was, again, not kind of an exposure to the hands model or to anything else, but rather something that you all felt that you could embrace and that you could train your own within your center, so that as people onboarded and people were coming in new and people were leaving and lots of transfer of different folks, that you weren't losing pieces because you weren't trained in an individual kind of activity or philosophy or approach, but one that, again, kind of, as you said, kind of weaves through everything that you were doing. And so ultimately what we've been able to do is work with your staff and with you to identify folks who would be best to in that role of a coach trainer to be able to use the methods, train in the hands model, but also that we worked over, because it was a 3-year project plus some again, we were able to really look at the fit and make sure that we were making adaptations based on the needs in the DAC and based in Singapore in general. What did you see with that process?
Right. So I think embedding coach trainers into the training process was very, very important. So and you can correct me if you have a different view, but having guided our staff to be the trainers added a different layer of understanding. So a lot of our staff, while were able to receive that training from yourself and your team relatively well, contextually, when it came from my staff, they kind of understood it a bit better, because the examples given were very much directed to what the DC is seeing and experiencing, and that kind of changed it quite a bit. And just to touch on a couple of other points about you mentioning COVID, yeah, it was quite a bit of a challenge, and I think Naomi just dropped off, but I'll continue, and if anyone has any questions, I'm open to them. But yeah, COVID was a massive challenge. It delayed a 3-year project into a 5-year one, but we managed to find our way and kept our alignment going through those different years. And she also talked about staff changes. So what we've noticed is that training is an integral part of actually staff retention for in the line of work that we do. So an example, and I'll share some context to this, is how in the years prior, we were having resignation rates close to 30 to even 40% in a year. And post-training and implementation, we got so much better that we were able to reduce it to the low teens. We're looking at 13 to 15%. And to us, that's a massive improvement. So staff felt that we were equipped, to kind of do and deliver the stuff that our clients were seeking and the support that caregivers were looking at.
Fantastic. So Zoom had dropped Naomi, but she'll be restarting back momentarily. But one of the things that I noticed in terms of his discussing your readings and your research, the autism spectrum affects 6 out of 1,000 children worldwide, and that's a huge public health challenge globally. And now, is that a familiar number in Singapore, or what are you seeing? I mean, these numbers are only children, but we're also talking about adults at this point.
Right. So you could say it's similar. I think just naturally, because Singapore being a smaller country, it doesn't seem as prevalent. But recent numbers tracked off somewhere in close of 50,000 individuals in Singapore actually have autism. And that number has been exponentially increasing. I mean, naturally due to, increased awareness, early identification. So we have a lot more children with autism now. And Singapore has to catch up in terms of adult services, having enough services to support all these individuals with autism. So it is alarming at how we have to be prepared to support these people, but nonetheless we are definitely progressing in the right direction. I would say, yeah. So numbers are a bit scary, yeah.
So we sort of jumped into the discussion, and I'm not in the field of autism. In terms of your work with Naomi, Professor Swiezy, are there differences in the way autism is defined in her context, in the US context, and in Singapore? I mean, I see the range, in terms of the readings that I've made. Autism is hard to define, but in your center, how is it, when you're trying to identify, when you're trying to support, what are some of the things that are the top 3, identifiers, if I may say so, or top 3 priorities that you may have in working with your clients?
Appreciate your question. So to be honest with you, I would say it's very similar to the context in the US in terms of the challenges with autism and also the identification in terms of severity. So the most recent DSM criteria kind of changed it to level 1, 2, and 3 autism, suggesting level 1 is mild, with 2 being moderate and 3 severe. So the center that I work at actually caters to moderate to severe autism. And there, the most significant challenge are usually behavioral supports. So that's where a lot of our clients have challenge with sensory processing, which can lead to either physical behavior, tantrums, outbursts. And this usually stems from an inability to communicate. So that's where social interaction is one of the known deficits for individuals with autism. So with challenges in communication, you can imagine behavior naturally increases. So most of our students and clients, their interaction with the environment is also very different. So that's where having evidence-based practices and understanding the strategies on how to equip them with the skills of navigating just the home environment, the community, the school, goes a long way in helping them process the information that's around them.
So, I mean, I think your center obviously is one of the first, to residential housing for and support and long-term care for individuals with ASD. But you mentioned something interesting, which is evidence-based practices, right? What are those that have been in place in your center?
Right. So there are a few of them. If I could divulge further. So generally, there's goal setting. So that's considered one of the evidence-based practice where you kind of identify immediate needs and teaching areas that the client or the student needs to improve in order to have a better quality of life, whether it be in the domain of daily living skills, self-care, similar items to those. And then another evidence-based practice is positive behavior support. Here, what we're trying to do is trying to understand what are some of the antecedents to behaviors, and then identify and really target and understand those behaviors, and then subsequently some of the consequences that come after. So more often than not, how staff reacts to a behavior can either make it worse or can support the individual. So understand that concept of antecedent behavior and consequences another. So those would be two of many strategies. And Dr. Naomi is back. She's the expert here, and she can divulge more. Naomi, we were just talking about what are some of the evidence-based practices in the field. So would you like to add on?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know all that you shared, so forgive me if there is some repeat. Evidence-based practices in autism typically is the gold standard would be applied behavior analysis and that philosophy. So under that, there's many different strategies that I heard some that Keith was sharing. The philosophy is really a data-driven approach to making decisions about the interventions that are used with behaviors. So we look at behaviors as being, really a way of communicating. So for individuals with autism, the tendency is oftentimes, even if they have words and language, that it's very difficult for them to convey their points. And so we use a lot of visual strategies, a lot of structure. We definitely have to teach skills that replace inappropriate behaviors, because again, those inappropriate behaviors are very effective. If I throw something across the room, somebody's going to back away or not ask me to do anything anymore, or get me what I want. So we want to teach them other ways of communicating, ways to regulate themselves, and so on. So those are the main strategies, just really in a nutshell. Oftentimes medication management and ABA-based interventions are used together.
Right. And just to add on to that, I would just like to hear your thoughts on this. Having visited our centers, what were some of the strengths and where were some of the areas that we kind of needed to improve? This is a very interesting thing for me to hear.
Yeah. So I think I think again, this is where this is a very translatable process, and we see the same thing regardless of where we go. That there is a lot of people are working a bit too hard. They understand in theory the principles. So the environmental control, the setting up, the structure and the visuals and the schedules and all of those things very much in place, very much, even being utilized, but sometimes not being utilized to the degree that they could be, to really help ease the job of the coaches. So when they're having to provide instruction over and over and over again to an individual for the same thing, it's like, okay, what's a visual format that we could put into place? They know that those are needed, but weren't always thinking about where to embed those and then how to teach it. So, again, individuals with autism thrive on structure and visuals. But if it's not taught, then it's just another, something in the environment that they don't understand and they can't use. So I think really helping your staff to understand how to prompt effectively, how to incorporate lots of other visuals that they might not have thought would be needed beyond the standard was very helpful.
Right. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. And linking it to your article about parent training versus parent education, it's very similar, right? Where coaching is required. It's easy to impart knowledge and information, but it's the intricacy of application that is generally lacking in trainings that we've attended within Singapore. So that refreshed, we feel very refreshed when we attend the training and the engagement with your team. it really provided a different outlook and perspective to staff as to what coaching and mentoring meant.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to chime in at this point because it's 30 minutes after the hour and we're opening it up for questions. And there's been a series of questions here that have been coming in. But first and foremost, I think the question is, what is unique about hands?
So what's unique is really that framework and process. So what we've done is a lot of folks, as Keith had indicated, will focus on a particular strategy or a particular intervention and teach that. But they oftentimes don't teach to the point of fidelity, where people are being able to actually use it across situations, across individuals, and so on. And so what we really aim to do with hands is we're not creating new interventions. We're using the evidence-based practices that already exist and putting it into a format where folks understand when I have an individual with autism, or really this is beyond autism, it's effective with all learners, to really understand how to structure the environment. And if that's not enough, then what are some skills that we need to be teaching? If there's some behaviors, how do we reduce those? So it kind of gives them a progression and a roadmap, if you will.
Okay, so there's a question from Pin Fu, and here the question is, for adults with autism, what would be the ideal program for them to continue to engage and allow them to grow? The concern is that trainers may not have a good understanding of autistic individuals and their needs, and to be adequately trained to support these adults. And so there's a focus here on adults, not children. Anyone?
Right. I'll take a stab at this. So it really comes down to how well you know the individual. So the ideal is to balance, to find a balance between understanding what skills are needed to be acquired to be able to function in the community, as well as then tapping on their interests and identifying some of the areas that they enjoy. So I wouldn't advise or suggest one singular program that is ultimately effective for adults with autism, but instead personalization to it. So making adjustments to ensure that any form of teaching, any skills that you're being taught has a link to something that they're interested in. So that creates a motivating factor for the individual to engage in it. Yeah. Dr. Naomi, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that, again, the principles stay, regardless of whether a child or an adult. The difference with adults is they have a longer learning history. So sometimes the behaviors that they might have and the challenges they might have are pretty entrenched because they've had them for a while. So kind of the consistency in the approach, making sure that all individuals, and again, kind of speaking to what we've been talking about, are trained similarly, so that there's not different messages across different people, because they've already had a lot of messages for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so I think continuing on with the conversation, the question here is, I think, more for Naomi, in a sense that this one of our attendees is interested in the best practices in the US for adult homes for persons with autism. And one of the things of concern to this participant here is that Singapore does not have many such homes and with the right setup. And so I guess the best practices that you've seen for adult for homes for persons with autism. Naomi, you want to take that?
Yeah, so again, I think that speaks to the whole community needing to be trained. I think that oftentimes why our folks are triaged into homes or into residential facilities are because of, truthfully, it's not the individual themselves, but the community and the individuals working with them really having a firm understanding of those evidence-based practices. So in the United States and with our team, our focus is keeping them in with their natural supports and their natural environments. Mm-hmm. not necessarily into homes. I would say that we also don't have enough homes. We don't have enough residential if we're going to be reactive to the issues that oftentimes come up. So too many of our folks are placed with the idea that that's going to be a fix. And somehow a solution, but in the end, again, whoever is running those residential facilities, whoever is running the homes, has to have the training in these evidence-based practices.
Mm-hmm. I think the person who asked the question is also concerned about the effects of inappropriate handling of individuals with autism, and so I think that this speaks to what you're saying, that it takes a community. And so one of the other thing that you mentioned also is in terms of reactive versus proactive approach to working with autism. So either one of you could take the question, and is there a difference in how is it handled in your centers?
Right, Dr. Naomi, you can go ahead and give. No, you can go ahead and I'll give my
go ahead.
Right. So we do see a difference between being proactive and reactive. More often than not, if we're able to identify the different escalations in an individual, we can kind of support them accordingly through it. So being reactive generally means you haven't had the right support strategies in place, and that behavior then happens, and you have a negative reaction more often than not to what you're seeing. So what we learn from HANDS is that if you do the best practices ahead of time, that kind of minimizes the opportunity for that behavior to escalate even further. So if you have the right strategies, the right supports, the structure, the visuals, the teaching, the approach to how you support an individual, if those are all in place, then the escalation likelihood is a lot lower. So utilizing those proactive strategies can eventually mean you don't have to be reactive. That's how I will put it. Yeah.
Yeah, we use a mantra very often of pay me now or pay me later. So a lot of folks will say, it just takes a lot of time to prepare and individualize a lot of these supports for individuals with autism, and it most certainly does. However, if we don't, then we're paying later in having behavior, having folks who socially can't be with their community, they're not engaging in the academics or the work, whatever the case may be. So ultimately, the proactive is really where we want to go.
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, I'm getting I have multiple devices here, and the questions are coming in from through different devices. So one of the questions, obviously, is folks who are interested in what you mean by strategies and what you mean by the approaches, to give a few examples. So that's one of the questions. I'm just going to put it out there. But the other is that I think the comment that parents are the most informed about the children's needs. How have their input been used to inform researchers and practitioners in your centers? So that's one of the two questions. So you can take one or the other. I'm just putting it out there very quickly.
Yeah, I think just to speak to, because that's actually why I chose the couple of articles to read, is because they, kind of showed the importance of the parent context and the parent information, and every law, regulation, et cetera, in the United States definitely focuses on parents being at the table and being able to inform a lot of what is going on, whether it be in the school system, the medical system, and so on. However, the reality is that by looking just at the family members, it's not reality. That's not the natural context. And so what we found in practice is that if there is any weak link, if people who are in, first responders, or people who are in the school system, or the medical folks, or community providers coming into the home, if there's any weak links there where they're not buying into the evidence-based practices, and doing something else, then it's creating a lot of struggle for the family as well as in every other setting. Not that that can't be, you can't change one setting to another, but honestly, it does take that whole team and the collaboration across the team, which is, 20 years ago when I started Hands was the premise for starting it, to get that bridging going and everybody training and speaking a common language. And that's still true today, that's a missing link.
Right, and I'll give some context from a center's perspective. So we do believe that parents are the biggest source of information because they spend the most time with the child. As a center that I run, we have 6 hours with the child, and we notice that most of the time information shared with the parents are not similar to what we see in the center. So then the question becomes why? Why is there a massive difference of behaviors in between the school setting as well as home? So then we make that understandable deduction that practices at home and the center are very different. And it can be due to various reasons. I mean, we only serve the individual for 6 hours. Families go through a lot more intensive time with their child, and they may be unable to be consistent with some of the practices they do. So while we connect with families on a daily basis to get updates, get behavioral information, it generally still a lot of training and skills acquisition from the parents are important in our context here.
Mm-hmm. So examples of the specifics, I think Hands has this, I think you have this slide which shows the specific things that Hands, does. Hands as a center does, Hands not plural. But you want to show that?
I would love to. I had issues earlier, so it went away. So I do apologize about that. Okay. I can bring it up quickly if you want to describe any of those practices. I think Keith, yes. One of the things I'll just mention is, we think of the principles as being they're very practical educational behavioral principles that apply again to everybody. So when we talk about, for example, structure, we're looking at the foundation of what needs to be there so that an individual with autism or other disability understands what's going on in their environment. And when you do that, when you create some understanding through those visuals and the way that they process information. So a lot of our individuals take longer to process information. They get distracted by various things in their environment. So having something that cues them and reminds them of what they're needing to do or how they're needing to do it or where they're needing to do it is essential. But when we think about it in our own environments, that's the case as well. When we're driving down the street, we have signs, we have marks on the highway, we have, we know where it's okay to exit, where it's not okay to exit. We know what direction to go and so on. So when we go into a large facility, there's signage, there's information visually that we can get. We do the same thing with individuals with autism. It's just kind of amplified and individualized for them a bit. Mm-hmm. So I will go pull this up, Keith, if you want to speak to any of the other kind of strategies.
No pressure for you to do that because we can continue discussion. I think the question that just came in from another participant is what is hands-on? And I'm reading some of the things that you have: applied behavior, picture exchange, functional communication training, incidental teaching, pivotal response, discrete trial training, positive behavioral support, and so on and so forth. Those are some of the elements of Hands that I think if someone were to look into your center, will see them displayed. So the question I think, that also has come on from another device is problematizing a little bit some of the discussion today, which is, we're talking about two cultural contexts, right? In other professions, the idea of translatability is problematized. You can't transfer one to the other. There's no such thing in some fields. Is that something also that you talk about in terms of translation of one model to another? Keith, if you want to take on that question, because you've worked with hands, right? In terms of that consideration and what you have done with that consideration, and what are some of the cultural elements that has cropped up that requires a rethinking?
Right. So I was going to actually allude this to Naomi because we had a conversation about this on how we wanted to kind of explain the differences that she saw. But I'll touch on it real quickly. What I felt that it wasn't that big of a difference culturally, to be honest with you. While there were information that we needed slight adaptation, what we've noticed is that the principles remain the same. It's just understanding to that specific context within the center or a specific country. How do you adapt and apply? So we don't want to force fit any of the practices that are being applied and suggested by hands. Instead, it's just making small differences, small adjustments to really benefit the specific individual. So like then we said, language barrier wasn't a main issue. Most of the teachings and most of the trainings were very easy to adapt towards the center. Naomi, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really similar to like when you go into a family home, and that's a culture right there. Or you go into a classroom and that's a culture right there. An organization, a country, is definitely there's cultures there. And so I think it's a very purposeful, very purposeful on our part. In order to have that translation, just like you mentioned about, or asked about the family involvement, folks need to be involved and to buy in and to really be able to see that they can envision it being used in their particular context. And so I think because we are not, kind of tied to any one context, we do train first responders, we do train EMS folks, who are riding around in the ambulance and go with them, go on routes with them and learn what their day is like. And then the idea is, and why they need us, I guess, from the beginning, not ultimately, is really to be able to now how can you adapt the principles without completely changing the principles in a way that it won't work? So how do we, again, layer on those various principles and strategies, some of which, Farida, that you just mentioned, that are all part of applied behavior analysis?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the question was, what does HANDS stand for? I'm just going to read it quickly. Helping answer needs by developing specialists. HANDS, that's the program. I think just really quickly addressing that question, and so that if those folks who are visiting the web can look up what HANDS stand for. And so I think the other question that has come up and is you kept mentioning philosophy, consistency and philosophy. So what is that philosophy that both centers are going by, that research and practitioners, scholars are going by in terms of working with ADS folks?
So I think it's, again, applied behavior analysis is really the overriding philosophy. And so those different strategies like pivotal response training and discrete trial training and all of those components that are different individual strategies, a lot of people really focus on training just one strategy, and one size does not fit all. So the philosophy is more around a very data-driven approach to decision making. We don't look at things as, a child has autism, so therefore there are these strategies we use. They're having such and such behavior, so there's these strategies we use. The strategies we use are very much based on analysis and taking data on the behaviors, on their skills, and making a plan that helps to address the particular needs of that individual. And that is very different.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you have questions for each other?
Would you do this again?
Yes, I would. Yeah. To be honest with you, I would just like to add on to what Dr. Naomi said about being data-driven. It's an accurate representation of what most practitioners in working with people with autism do. It's not just on the positive side. of things, learning how good they are progressing with some of the skills they're trying to get, but also in terms of the behaviors that we see, taking the data on how often it happens, the intensity, the frequency, the duration. These are all data that we need to collect on a regular basis to make the best informed decision for the people we serve. Yeah.
Is there a
I think
Singaporean approach that you've introduced, Keith?
Sorry, could you say again?
Is there a localized Singaporean approach that you've layered onto hands?
No, not anyone in particular. To be honest with you, I think most centers in Singapore, they adopt and they modify to their context. So we learn from all the different experts in around the world. We're not very good at what we do, but we're trying to get to where we need to be. Yeah. So we don't have a Singaporean module or a Singaporean specific philosophy or way of doing things. Instead, we are very cognizant that we need to learn from the best, and that happens from all around the world. Yeah.
Naomi? Anything
no, I think
you want to add to the discussion? Is there something that you've learned? And the reason I'm asking this too, because my field is also about scaffolding individuals with different diverse backgrounds, and so that's why I'm sort of fueling the question, essentially. And so that's we've been asking questions, from all the readings and all the settings that we have here. Is there a question that we did not ask that you feel should be asked?
I think that one thing, maybe addressing some of what you indicated, we do a bit differently as well, is that I think that when there is an interest in learning, so an organization or a state even is adopting particular interventions, then everybody is kind of trained in that intervention, but it's not necessarily adapted based on the learners. So just like with individuals with autism, everybody learns and has different roles and contexts and needs. So one of the things about hands too is that we really started the organization with the emphasis on what is good training, and good training really to the point of implementation requires that there is opportunity for practice and feedback and coaching and mentoring, but not everybody can access that. And not everybody needs all of that. So we really provide a full continuum of information, workshops, and various formats, and work with, again, back to the first responders. They're not going to come to a workshop. They're not going to spend 5 days with us, but they were very interested in having a USB that had information on it that they could print off and give to their families to help in situations. So things like that, being very agile and very adaptable in the way in which we train, but again, the principles are the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is a question that came on another device, which is, and someone evidently has read stuff. Thank you for the question. What is the difference between parent training and parent education in autism?
Oh, excellent. So that was defined within the study that I mentioned, and this was really a seminal study. I was with a network for over 15 years where we were working on, parent training in behavioral methods. It started out with some older children and then with younger children. And then we really wanted to see in a randomized control trial how if it mattered if parents were being trained in specific behavioral interventions, evidence-based practices, or if it was really they were having the same response and same learning if we were doing parent education, which was not addressing any behavioral interventions at all, but rather just talking about the rules and regulations, the folks in the community that you should be collaborating with, just some basics about autism, but nothing that was intervention based. And what we found is that both sets of families really improved in their ability to work with the negative behaviors or problem behaviors of their children, learn the skills very well. parent training came out better, but it wasn't so much so that we could slam dunk say that that is, the way to go. So parent education, just informing families, giving them some information and a context to ask questions was very helpful as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the division. Parent education, parents stay longer, but in terms of disruptive behavior, parent training seems to address that a little bit in the immediate. So we have so few minutes here. As I mentioned, time flies. Keith, is there something that you want us to take away with, as we end this session?
Right. Maybe just to highlight how it takes a village to support any individual with autism. That's why the work that Dr. Naomi does is so important, really training everyone, the whole community, the different agencies. It's something that is deeply, deeply resonated with me. And I hope that locally we will push further to get to where what the US is doing right now. So yeah, that's how I would put it.
Naomi, any thoughts you want to leave us that we can ponder some more?
I think, one of the things that Keith and I have talked a lot about as well is, again, that training across the different roles. So the importance of administration, importance of staff, buy-ins at all levels. Because again, one weak link will not, will make a difference, a negative difference. But saying that, we had COVID in between. We did have lots of staff changes. We had full administrative changes. There were many things that changed within the context of working together, but still we were able to accomplish that goal very effectively. And I guess one of the things that we'll see going into the future, and maybe Keith, you might have indication of some of that too, is just what, for a consultant on the outside. So the idea was that we fade this all out, that we get out of the picture. So we are basically out of the picture, but that what are the boosters? What are the things that, staff still feel like they're going to need some help with, or the regularity of that, or the format of that?
I think one of the things, and I just saw this question from May, to add to the community, to the village, grandparents. I think for me, as someone from that side of the world as well, grandparents play a huge role because parents are busy. I think that's one of the cultural differences. And so I think if you're looking at your model, I think May would suggest add grandparents into the consideration. And so because in the Southeast Asian context, they play a huge role in care of children and those in need. So I think with that, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for the wonderful and insightful conversation. We hope to continue with this discussion in the next series. And so we thank the audience too for your avid participation on multiple devices. And so thank you everyone for your time, and the speakers for your wisdom and for your insights.